Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Risk and Trends annual Polityka Insight conference. This year, due to pandemic constraints, we've decided to organize this conference online. My name is Tomaszewski. I'm a senior energy analyst, and I invite you to listen to 3 conversations as part as a climate and energy block.
I want to welcome you very warmly in our conference. So we are extremely happy that you accepted our invitation. My name is Tomaszewski. I'm senior analyst at Polityka Insight, and here is Dominik Brodacki, my colleague. We both cover energy and issues and climate policy in Poland and in the European Union in Polityka Insight. And the first question to you, I would like to ask you about your attitude to this, what is going to happen in 2021, because 2020 was extremely hard for our economy, for our for whole European Union, for all the member states, of course, because of the pandemic. But if we talk about climate policy, there are signs to be more optimistic about what is going to happen. We have in USA, which is coming back to the Paris Climate Agreement. We have China, which is going to publish detailed plan how to achieve the climate neutrality in April. And we have, of course, European Union with a very ambitious climate agenda. So my question to you is dawn of climate optimism breaking? And do you think that we will use this opportunity to slow down the pace of global warming globally? Please.
Well, I think in the first place, if you compare where we are now with a year ago, there's reason to be more optimistic. The European Union launched its Green Deal over a year ago, and then we were sort of alone, and many people were saying we're only 8 or 9% of emissions worldwide. There's no point if the rest doesn't do anything. And since then, you've seen China, Japan announcing climate neutrality 2050, South Korea, South Africa, and a host of countries moving in that direction. Of course, after the elections in the United States, you also have the Biden administration on board, even quite radically on board, I would say, with really a change of course. And I believe that bodes well for the political side. But one has to also be realistic on the content side, on what's happening with our climate. We're still on a bad track. We still are not on the right track. So we get this opportunity because of the political constellation to try and get it right when the world meets in Glasgow in November this year, to then set the course to climate neutrality. And we've done our homework. We will also decide on the climate law in spring, and then we will come with concrete proposals. And let's hope we can convince the rest of the world to go in the same direction. Then we can be optimistic.
But what risk do you see in this process? Because everybody can agree to this, that this climate race is accelerating. But do you think that what are the main obstacles that you can see in this coming year, in 2021, that we need to be aware of?
Well, frankly, I think the main obstacle is political. Because most of business, look at your own country, business in Poland has turned a corner. Business in Poland understands we need to go into this direction, but we need to organize this. This is a very, very complex transition, and a complex transition that happens on a world scale. So we need to get organized to make it happen. And of course, there will be, because every transition is painful and difficult. And sometimes the temptation is to just look at the mountain you need to climb and then to say, the mountain is too high, I'll avoid climbing it. But then we have to look at the cost of non-transiting, and that cost is even much higher. So I think the main bottleneck is, do we have enough political will and political courage to do what is necessary? I think the omens are positive. But there can always be, the pandemic is still not under control. The consequences for the economy, we cannot all oversee right now. But given the determination of the leaders, I think we can get there this year.
EU is divided in the shape and pace of the transformation. The division is between the member states. It is, of course, based on that Eastern countries are basing their energy systems more on fossil fuels. Western countries are more targeting renewables, nuclear energy, and so on to move in that direction. Do you think that those divisions inside the EU are our weakness or our strength that we can somehow use to increase this pace of transformation? How do you see this situation? And do you see if these divisions are getting bigger, or are we moving and trying to build bridges in this energy transformation?
Well, to start with your last question, the divisions are getting smaller, and they're quickly getting smaller. We're all getting on the same page. Secondly, we all have different starting positions. You have a different geographical position. When you're close to the sea, it's easier to generate offshore wind. If you're landlocked, that's much more difficult, obviously. We have different histories. Some countries in Central and Eastern Europe carry on their shoulders a huge legacy of oppression and occupation that also had a huge influence on the energy mix, because, as you know, the Soviet system was maintained through energy more than anything else. But it's no longer an East-West divide so much, because some countries in the West have taken steps to reduce their dependency on fossil fuels. Take France, for example, where much of the energy generation is nuclear. But some countries in Western Europe, like Germany, still have coal mines. And some countries in Central and Eastern Europe have gone quite far. Hungary is moving quite quickly, and the Baltic states are moving very quickly. So I would never see this as an East-West issue. I would more see it as every single member state has its own challenges. And Poland has a particular challenge with an 80% dependency on coal for energy generation. Then the final point of it, is it a strength or a weakness? It is a strength if we are able to concretely show solidarity. If we can show concretely that those member states with an extra challenge also get extra support from the others who have less of a challenge. So if we leave no one behind, if we show clearly a strategy to get everybody at the same level, even if some have more work to do, then I believe this can be a strength, the division, because then countries can specialize. I can come up with a number of ideas where Poland, for instance, could specialize. Poland could be a prime place for the generation of hydrogen, for instance. Just to give you one example, Poland has huge opportunities in the Baltic Sea for offshore wind. Nobody was talking about that 5 years ago. Now look what's happening. If you look at in Poland, how many people are picking up the possibilities of solar energy, also on a private level. It's incredible. It's almost a revolution. So, I am very enthusiastic about these possibilities, and there's no country that has to fear to be left behind here. Not just because, there's a clear expression of solidarity in our policies, but also because the populations want it. Again, take Poland as an example. I think most Poles, especially younger people, your generation, find it completely unacceptable that more than 30,000 people every year die prematurely because of bad air quality. That's about 10 times the people Poland loses through car accidents. I mean, this is not acceptable, and I don't think any citizen in Poland wants their children to live in those conditions.
These divisions which we're talking about, we can easily see in the rising electricity prices in Europe, and how not to deepen social inequalities and create new areas of exclusion, and how to rebuild the social policy to complement the energy policy.
Yes, and I think you raise a very, very important issue. If this transformation leads to especially the people who are already in a weaker position getting even weaker, and those people already in a good position getting even richer, then it will be socially so divisive that it will not happen. And everybody who's very enthusiastic about the transition should understand this. It is going to be a just transition, or there's just not going to be a transition. It's that simple. And energy poverty is one of the key issues in this.
When we talk about energy poverty, it is of course, especially in Poland, the thing that the growing prices of CO2 makes the electricity more expensive, and the danger of creation of the energy poverty is approaching. But during this transition period of our economy, of our energy system, for example, in Polish heating systems, we will need more gas. And just to replace coal, just to make all the system work. Do you see that the risk that on the one hand, we as a European Union, we approve this way, that the gas will be used during this transition period of our transformation. But on the other hand, the growing prices of CO2 can jump to such a level that even gas starts to be a very problematic fuel from an economic point of view for the companies which are producing heat. So how to balance this?
Well, let me put it this way. I think already, both in terms of price and in terms of emissions, natural gas is a huge improvement over coal. Because if you look at coal, you don't only look at the price paid by the consumer. You have to look at the subsidies given to keep that sector alive, which in the Polish case is enormous. There is no future in coal. Let's start from that. And I think I had a meeting with the trade unions from all over Europe, but especially Central and Eastern Europe last week. And there's not one trade union that disputes this. There is no future in coal. The only question is, how do you exit from it in a fair way? So natural gas will have to be a transition fuel. If you do the investments you need for that in power generation, in the infrastructure to get it to the households, if you do that in such a way that you pre-fit this infrastructure for post-natural gas energy carriers, which can be decarbonated natural gas, but especially hydrogen or other such fuels, such energy carriers, then it's a really good investment, because then the investment is really very limited. And the results will be huge, because then once you can use decarbonated or carbon-free energy carriers, then of course the cost will go down tremendously. And especially if you see the latest developments surrounding hydrogen.
I have just last philosophical question to you, sir, and it is also, of course, about the energy transformation. What will be the geopolitical impact of transformation on us, on Europe, but also in the bigger scale, on our neighbors? How it will transform it?
Every industrial revolution, especially if it also concerns energy, has the potential to be incredibly disruptive. On a national scale, on a continental scale, and on a global scale. Some are preparing for this. If you look at the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, etc., they are investing massively in a future based on hydrogen. You see the same in the north of Africa. You see the same in the United States. Is a huge energy producer. They're thinking about the same potential. So some are really already preparing for this. Russia is only very, very carefully exploring this. And as someone who's worked and lived in Russia, and this is my background. I think we should be thinking about that as Europeans. Also, because a Russia that is unstable or desperate is a direct challenge, if not threat, to our own stability. So we should be thinking in long-term geopolitical frameworks about this relationship, and how we could also be a part of helping Russia digest this energy transition, and then investments will be necessary in completely new areas and make them less dependent of raw material production. Also, because if you move into new areas, you also have a chance of more developing the middle classes, and that will create better circumstances for the rule of law, for an open society, and for democracy. But Russia is a long way from there. But you see people going to the streets. Why? Because they're unhappy with the situation as is. But having said all that, just imagine what the potential for conflict would be if we do not come to terms with the climate crisis. Then we will have wars over water. That is my prediction if we don't change our policies, because water is going to be scarce. Droughts are going to be everywhere. You will not be able to have crops in places where for millennia you had crops. The weather will become completely erratic. We will have storms that we cannot predict and cannot control. And then we're just talking about Europe. Just imagine what this will do to Africa and other places. There is another factor here that I want to draw your attention to. You were talking about the energy factor. We were also talking about the Industrial Revolution. Look at the demographic factor. We have now about 500 million Europeans. We will probably be more or less 500 million in the future, perhaps a bit less. Africa is going from less than 1 billion to 2, 3, 4 perhaps billion in the future. Just imagine, just comparing these two continents, what these demographic changes mean of how we need to realign ourselves and how we need to reinvent ourselves in terms of our economy and in terms of our energy.
And sir, the last question from us today to you is a very short one. Poland is still the only country in Europe which still has not recognized the goal of achieving climate neutrality till 2050 yet. Do you think that Warsaw will change its mind this year?
Well, I think there is a high level of what I would call a constructive ambiguity here on all sides. But my bottom line is still that Poland is on board. Only Poland wants to know exactly what this means concretely for Poland. 6 coal mining regions still having to exit out of coal. They're not all in the same situation. How long will this take? There is an agreement between the government and the trade unions, but it still needs to be submitted to Brussels and see what happens. And then you have some amazing coal mining regions. Zielona Polska declaring that it wants to be climate neutral very soon. I mean, this is just so exciting to me. So I believe that the pulse of Polish society is beating hard for this transformation, and I believe that the government knows this. And I also believe, if you put all the European money together that will be available for Poland, we are talking to almost 1/4 of Polish GDP. Can you imagine how big that investment is? And can you imagine how huge the opportunity is for Poland? Or to put it in a reverse reasoning, what a huge missed opportunity it would be if Poland did not embrace this transformation, being helped by its friends and partners in such a huge way. Up to 1/4 of Polish GDP coming from other European countries to support Poland in its transformation. That's quite something. And I hope it also underlines the fact that everybody recognizes that Poland is crucial in this transformation, but also that there is something like EU solidarity, and that there is something like Brussels listening to the aspirations and wishes of Poland.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that you joined us, and hopefully we'll meet again soon, maybe on the next Risk and Trends of Polityka Insight next year. We really appreciate what you said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękujemy.
Cześć.
See you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, our next guest is Dr. Karsten Wildberger, member of the Board of Management E.ON. He's responsible for sales and customer solutions in regional units, distributed generation, energy management, marketing, digital innovation and transformation, and information technology. Good to have you here. I would like to start with the moment where we are now with the process of the transformation in energy sector. This is very challenging moments during stages of the pandemic, and I would like to ask you how the recovering from the coronavirus pandemic will affect energy transformation in EU and the fight against the global warming. Are we in a moment that a little bit of optimism is something that we can have? What's your point of view where we are with this process?
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. Look, I'm much more optimistic about the chances and the opportunities for addressing climate change in the energy sector coming out of Corona. And there are several reasons for that. The first one, I would say, is there is a growing commitment also on the political side to say this is now the time to join forces and put a very strong, ambitious recovery package together, the Green Deal. So 550 million euros specifically devoted to accelerate that energy transition. I think this is a fantastic stimulus package for the recovery, for the European Union, but also to drive the necessary energy transition change forward and take a leadership position. The second point that makes me very positive is, I think, a growing belief and understanding in society also how important this is. I think the pandemic has sharpened our views around issues like climate change, and there's a higher level, let's say, of consciousness. What can we contribute to protect life, to protect the planet? And thirdly, which I think is very crucial for the entire debate, the energy change does not hinder economic growth. I'd say it's just the opposite. It actually accelerates economic growth because this technology is required for future prosperity, and hence the technology is there. We just have to do it. So I think the key question is just how do we execute? It's more now a question also for politics as well as businesses. How do we get the horsepower on the rubber on the road and really make it happen?
The energy transformation is accelerating rapidly in EU, but the pace of it, the pace of the decarbonization process is different in member states. Some member states are more advanced with it, but some are not. Like, for example, Poland, which has the highest share of coal in its energy mix. Do you think that this widening difference could endanger this process, like this difference between member states? Is it a threat, or we can somehow use it as the advantage in reaching the climate neutrality goal?
Well, in what you describe, I think lies a risk, and but I think this is not just a question that's related to the climate change and the energy transition. I think this is an inherent challenge in the European Union. And I would say the following: it is absolutely crucial that all member states join forces about the conviction. Let's really get the job done. And then we also have to acknowledge differences. I think this is not a contradiction, acknowledging differences, but at the same time having a willingness to go faster and go fast and decisively as a whole. That would also mean that some countries may be more advanced than others in their speed. But I think what must not happen is that it slows us down. And I think that will be the challenge for the future, how we overcome this. I think, but I think that has to be based on the common belief that addressing climate change will help every single country, every single economy. But the differences, of course, the starting points are different, and hence the kind of medicine that we apply has to be also different. But we must not slow down in our ambition and our speed of execution.
When we talk about the energy transformation, we cannot avoid the question about the technology and what will happen when we invest in different types of energy technology and its impact, its consequences for the economy and for the people. So do you think, because we are now facing tremendous increase of the CO2 prices, which makes the space of transformation, of course, more rapid, but on the other hand, it put the question how to do it. Do you think that with the knowledge we have now, with the state of the market, basing on the renewables, is it enough? For example, with some role of gas in this transition period, or maybe there is some kind of possibility for nuclear renaissance, the nuclear technology in European energy mix. This is the question which we are also facing in Poland, but many member states are also thinking about this, thinking what will be the source of the energy which will help us to reach the climate neutrality.
Right. Well, it's a great question, and I think it goes also to the core of how we manage this transition effectively. I'm absolutely convinced, and I think all numbers and analyses confirm this that I'm aware of, is the first priority is to really build out and accelerate the build-up of renewables. Onshore wind, offshore wind, solar. And solar has huge potential also in terms of cost perspective. And we've made progress, but I think we're too slow in the build out. I think this is for any country is the right thing to do. Now, to the second question about nuclear, I personally convinced that we should and we can solve that question without nuclear. In Germany, as you know, we are phasing out nuclear completely end of 2022, and we're in the midst of that transition. Then the question is, what is replacing in the interim period? And I think natural gas and the decarbonization of gas will play a crucial role in all of that. If you look at very ambitious build-out scenarios for Europe in 2050, the continent or the European Union, we can actually base our energy system 2/3 based on all renewables that we produce locally within Europe. The rest will need some shape or form of imports. And that's why we also invest heavily into hydrogen and or decarbonized the gas sector to see, is there a new economy with imports from other sun-rich countries like the Middle East or Australia? Is that a possible future? So I think what is important is, despite all different technologies we're discussing, this must not slow us down in our execution of the rollout of renewables.
The energy production in the EU is getting more decentralized. This is a trend, this is happening now. It creates a lot of new possibilities for smaller entities, for startups to appear on the market, to start producing energy, but also for us, for the citizens, for prosumers. We are able to produce our electricity in our households, installing, for example, the photovoltaic panels on our rooftops. How this new reality, new decentralized reality of energy transformation in Europe will change the position of old guards, of old companies, incumbent utilities, which are facing great dilemma, where to go with my business. If I see, for example, that there is a growing number of very small producers, how it will transform my business model. So how these old companies will be transformed by this process, and what will be the role of them in the future, the market energy of the future?
Well, clearly every system change and every technology change that also sits behind that puts any industry, especially established industries, under pressure. And they have to find the right answers with regards to their business model. As a matter of fact, E.ON has the same challenge like any other energy company, and we found our answer to this challenge in the last 5 years. So we have not only spun off power generation, conventional power generation, we are focusing today based on this decentralized energy system model, with being Europe's largest grid company, energy networks company. and focusing on what we call customer solutions. So working on the edge of the grid with customers and for customers in this decentralized world. I'd say every single company has to find their answer to those challenges. And when I look at this decentralized world, of course, going through your existing business model, it means quite some pain. But when you get it right, there's again opportunity at the end of the tunnel and some light at the end of the tunnel. What I mean by that is, let's take the grid or the distribution networks. In order to manage the new system with millions of decentralized intermittent assets, you have to invest heavily into the networks because they become more intelligent. We invest today more into software, data, into silicon than into copper, because the intelligence of those distribution networks is increasing every single month. So from a business perspective, this means a lot of growth opportunities. It also, of course, also costs money. If I think of customer solutions, let's take e-mobility. If in 10 years we have a market with millions, 100 million electric cars, vehicles in Europe, of course, they need green energy. This green energy will be distributed in a different way. There will be charging infrastructure. There will be new business models like roaming, managing fleets. This industry is not necessarily best known for developing, say, new business models and making money out of that. But the opportunities that we see are huge. And the last example I can give you is being serious about the energy transition. One of the most effective ways is to also address the heating sector. And when you talk about the heating sector, then I'm talking about, getting to cleaner heating solutions in cities, in communities. And that's, for instance, something we also do very successfully in Poland. And I think it's a wonderful market with lots of opportunities where we can replace coal-fired assets to gas-fired assets and make this work.
Sir, you talked about the grids, and I would like to focus a little bit more on this topic because it is extremely important. It's like a bottleneck of the energy transformation, the investments in grids. So do you think that what is more important now for the quality of our transformation, energy transformation in Europe? Should we focus more on the local grids, just to make, for example, a bigger possibility for the prosumers to be part of the energy system, to make this grid, make this network working better? Or should be there focus on the European level? I mean, the network to integrate as soon as possible, of course, European member states, some high voltage infrastructure, just to be sure that we can finish building of the European market. Both of these processes are really important for the transformation. Do you see that some of those two processes is more important now?
I think the things that we need to get right, and they have to work in parallel, is the build out of renewables, larger scale. For that, of course, you also need the transmission capacity. But at the same time, we see an acceleration of the decentralized local build-out. And that, of course, also requires very, very strong and heavy investment needs into the distribution networks. And I'd say the energy transition in the end will only work with super smart distribution networks that orchestrate this complex system. So I think this is an absolute necessity. And from our side, we see so many investment opportunities and necessities to make that future happen.
One question about the business responsibility for the energy transformation and the role of it, because the many energy companies in Europe have grown rich over years by from the exploration of the fossil fuels, by selling them, by producing electricity, heat from coal, from gas. Do you think that now they should bear the cost of closures of the mines, power plants, or it should be somehow mixed responsibility, because also states were owners of those companies, for example, in many cases. So do you see here like the solution to make this transformation more just from this business perspective?
Well, if you look at lots of the development from a market perspective, a lot of the older technologies will disappear because of market forces. And I think every investor who invests will base his or her decision on market economy decisions. So I think market forces can be a very good instrument to make this transition happen anyway. Now the question comes to, if you want to put a very hard stop in for, say, political, societal reasons. And I think then we have to be careful in the following sense, because now something very big is at stake. And what is at stake is credibility, reliability, and trust. So when an investor invests money, a lot of money, especially like in a fixed asset industry where you invest for 15, 20 years plus, then I think it is important that these investors have the confidence that the contracts once were signed are actually worth something. And I think if that transition or the investment doesn't work out for market reasons, that's a different story. But when it's really forced, I think each state needs to find the right way to, on the one hand, protect investment and still do the right things, say, what is needed for the time being. So I'm not a friend at all of the principle, let's just change it and you bear all the costs, because the damage goes much deeper. Future investments, people look for long-term stability, and that attracts capital, and we need all of that. And I think that has a lot to do with reputation. So I think I would say both principles, or the three principles basically, market forces, not just having a one-side burden on the industry, but also long-term stability and reliability are important factors.
Taka właściwa reputacja firmowa też jest bardzo istotna.
Thank you as well, and have a great conference.
In a discussion about the energy transition, we are mostly focusing on economic consequences, often forgetting about social consequences. The question whether a transition can be made with a human face is equally important, though. Poland, after 1989, went through a huge change when it comes to the transition of its own economy. Right now, we are facing another huge change which will affect not only the energy sector, and also the pace of the decarbonization, but also other economic sphere, but also a social sphere. That's why I wanted to ask Izabela Zygmunt with a first question and ask how to avoid the mistakes and errors that we've made in the transition in the 1980s, in the energy transition which is ongoing right now and which is gathering pace. Hello everyone, thank you very much for this invitation. And from this previous transition and many others which took place across the world over the recent decades, some conclusions were drawn and thoroughly analyzed by scientists, and we know pretty much what kind of errors were made and how this ideal transition should look like. The fundamental differences, what happened during the closure of mines in 1990s was a process without any thorough analysis of social consequences and any preparation. And what happened and what had this adverse effect was this sudden and unprepared disappearance of many jobs, and these were not jobs which disappeared across various sectors, so you could compensate. These were the jobs which meant the lack of any revenue of the whole communities in the cities which were so very dependent on coal mining, and not repeating this error should consist in the fact that knowing that the coal mines are bound to be closed because the coal is disappearing very quickly, we should try to find ways to make sure that people are not left alone. And one of the solutions which was used in the past, severance pay plus training was not sufficient. We should find much better solutions. After an analysis of expectation of employees, we are going to implement the programs whereby we would have investments on one hand and trainings on the other hand. So it cannot be only a scattered financial assistance. We know from the past that this process is not going to work. Are you not afraid that this pace, which is increasing by year, it's determined by the climate policy of the EU, which is more and more stringent towards fossil fuels? We need to stop the climate catastrophe, and there is no getting back. The faster we do it, the easier it will be for the future generations to adjust to this new situation. It will be easier to limit the negative consequences, but at the same time, when we take a look on the ground, we will see increasing prices of electricity, increasing prices of heat, and the expansion of the so-called energy poverty, so the situation where I cannot afford to heat my house or to pay basic media bills. Is there any way to make sure that a social policy compensate this energy policy, that the exclusion field is as narrow as possible? What do you think? For starters, when we think about energy poverty and energy prices, we should make sure that we are moving away from coal as quickly as possible, because we have the most expensive energy in Europe because of the coal. If we want to have the prices go down, we should replace them with renewables because they are cheaper. This is one thing. The other thing, the energy poverty in the heating area, a solution would be to start implement a clean air program and to treat it as an instrument to combat the energy poverty. This is another thing that can be done. We have available EU funds. We can use these monies and make sure that not only we have the clean air, but people will be living in a heated flats, not paying a lot of money. And the third thing, which is not so obvious, is unleashing a possibility for the energy consumers, which the EU envisioned in 2018 by a great energy reform. In this new future model of the energy market, the consumer is no longer a passive recipient, but also an active participant. And starting since June this year, we should have the right as prosumers not only to generate our own energy for our own needs, but also a right to produce it more and to sell it. This capability should be available, this option should be available for everyone, not only for the owners of single-family houses. The mechanisms should be in place, making sure that every person can take advantage of this scheme. And it's not everything. Under this new model, the consumers of energy may play a role of providers of energy, so stabilizing this supply. When we have this change of mentality, who the consumer of energy is, and will provide these opportunities for people, it is very likely that this energy poverty problem will disappear. Now, I would like to ask Alicja Messerszmidt how this transition is taking place from the point of view of brown coal mine. What are the threats for these employees, what is the perception of this threat, and whether such transition can be with human face. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start with the statement that brown coal is very different from hard coal. Namely, in the hard coal sector, the employees were always privileged. This is a large social group from Silesia, which is very influential. So the Polish Parliament was adopting laws which were preventing, or which was protecting their rights. We could never compare with this group. We've noticed it, especially when we were privatized, and it was difficult to do anything for us because we were always considered as a second category privatized business, even though electricity produced by us ends up in the national grid. And then this private owner is not a problem. So without the support of the Polish state, our region will become the second city of Wałbrzych. It will become a city of unemployed persons. Today, the unemployment rate is at the level of 7% in the city of Konin, in the Powiat at the level of 9.4%, in Wielkopolskie region 3.7%, and in Poland it's 6.1%. This unemployment rate is going to continue to raise because we will see the closure of more open pits. We estimate that in our group 605,000 employees will be laid off. Taking into account this is one employee plus 3 family members, about 26,000 people will not have any sustenance. And we have to remember that one job in mining generates 6 other jobs in other sectors. Because there's other companies, contractors working with the mining companies. And we have to do something about it, because it seems that the Polish government does not realize what can happen in this region. We will see the poverty and the population. I would like also to draw your attention to the fact that in the 1980s in Konin we had 89,000 people, and today we have 66,000 people, and Konin has become a city of elderly. The youth are going to study to bigger cities, and they would never coming back having prospects of well-paid jobs, and this is something we cannot guarantee. However, with regards to this human face, I would like to say that first, this human face should be displayed by the parliamentarians, Polish government, and local politicians, parliamentarians, by adopting the laws which would guarantee the mining employees some privileges. I mean the brown coal privileges, just like they are in hard coal. The government should implement these laws, and also making it possible for the employees to retire, and the local governments should help the investors who would create new employment. If these 3 conditions are met, I will subscribe to this, and I will say that this transition has a human face. I would now like to ask Małgorzata Kasprzak and wonder how quickly it will happen. The prices for the emission licenses are increasing 35 euros per 1 ton of CO2 recently. So the fossil generation plants must close or reduce the number of hours they work, or it will lead to the increase of the prices of energy. On one hand, we see more ambitious climate goals for 2030. How will it translate into the prices of electricity in the coming years, which we are going to pay as households, but also as business and energy-consuming industry? Is this perspective of continuous increase is a given, or we don't know yet? Well, the EU ETS reform as part of the CO2 emission reduction can see the increase of the prices even higher, which will inevitably lead to the increase of the electricity for the end users. And answering your questions, what will it mean to the business and to the households? For the business, which are already balancing at the profitability level, the perspective of increased prices may put them out of business if there is no support. I think it was in June or July last year, about 20 most energy-consuming businesses sent a letter to Morawiecki saying they are in a dramatic position because of the electricity prices. And in the letter, they say that they support about 10% of GDP, and with contractors, it employs 1,300,000 people. So with such a scale, it is not difficult to see the butterfly effect. And you don't even need this effect to see off the foreign investments. The increase of the electricity prices will not be compensated by the cheap labor in Poland. What to do to make sure that this transition is more balanced at the regional level? When we talked about the distribution of EU funds, especially the funds of the just transition, what is proposed is a ready-made recipe for this just and equitable distribution. First of all, we need to know what is the plans of the coal regions, what are the social and economic consequences of these activities, and what needs to be done in order to prevent these consequences. And the amount of money to a given region should be a result of this complicated plan. So, as a result, we should first make sure that the coal regions are preparing the plans and specify their needs, and then we see the distribution of the available money. In Poland, it is organized in a different way, because we haven't seen yet this territorial distribution plans. However, the Ministry of Finance has already proposed its vision of distributing the money between the regions, and Silesia takes more than half of the whole pool, which is quite strange because a different ministry of the same government is talking to labor unions that we should postpone this transition and closing only one mine next year and continuing with the others. So half of the pool should end up in a region which is not planning any transition in the coming years, if you take into account this discussion seriously. And one should start distributing the money when we have the overall picture of the whole country, 6 coal regions, and it includes the regions where there is not even a start of this discussion and there are no plans to move away from the coal. So I think we need to correct how we are going to about this distribution. I think it is worthwhile to mention when we talk about the money from the Just Transition Fund, Poland, in order to get all the money, will have to submit a declaration that it wants to become a part of the European effort to reach the climate neutrality. And we haven't issued this declaration yet. We'll have to do it and to make an outline of a goal for 2050, because this is the horizon under which the EU is planning its activity. So this must happen, and from that we will see the resulting guidelines, what needs to happen before that time, before 2050. But I think that due to political reasons, we see this ongoing discussion, what should be our energy future, and it is not happening. So we are lacking this strategic long-term decision, which is making the planning at the local level more difficult, because we need to have some coordination at the government level. We are not talking about some lone islands, but the regions which are important parts of the overall energy system. So without orderly thinking at the governmental level, it will be very difficult to avoid negative social consequences. ZEPAK is the largest producer of energy from lignite. It employs almost 5,000 people, and its functioning matters for small cities which are living off this employer in the region. That includes Kleczew, Wierzbinek, Wilczyk, Sąpolno. These are some of the small cities. These are not easy regions which can survive and deal with all the challenges. What kind of offer we could propose to its local residents? How to help them to make sure that these regions are not falling into a developmental trap because they've lost the possibility to develop when ZEPAK is no longer there. What can be done? Well, as a matter of fact, the process of liquidation of brown coal industry started with closure of Adamów power plant in 2018. And we cannot forget about these employees because they are no longer there, but these people were left without jobs, without any sustenance. And I do agree that the activity of ZEPAK, our company, matters very much for these small cities, because the budgets of these cities are based on the taxes from the mine, because it was doing the mining activity there. And it's true that not many employees and residents from these cities found a new job, which only compounds the problems that these cities will have to deal with after the shutdown of the brown coal mine. Because these small gminas, these small cities, will no longer have the tax revenues and will still have many people who will not have any jobs. So we have a lot of employees, and we've been thinking what to do and how to get out of this conundrum to make sure that these people will find some employment. However, the local authorities, the local leaders should also remember that when they receive high taxes, they should think right now to employ them in their gminas, in their cities. Not to think that ZEPAK, the company, will successfully deal with all that, because thanks to the mine, all these small cities were able to live and survive. And right now, these local leaders, they should now contribute to the solution, to make sure that these people, at least as many as possible, find some employment, not to leave them to their own devices, because people can face some mental meltdown, because these people have huge mortgage loans. These people are not prepared that right now they will be deprived of any job. Polish energy is right now the dirtiest and the most expensive, or almost the most expensive in Europe. And our pace of decarbonization of the energy sector is lagging behind. This is one of the conclusions of the report of Ember think tank, which was published a dozen or so days ago. I wanted to ask you a question, because there are various ways how to manage this transition. But when you take a look at this market in other countries which are dealing with this challenge of moving away from fossil fuels, do you think there are some experiences that we could try to copy, to try to follow with regards to this decarbonization? Every country has a slightly different specific and is starting from a different level. But I think there are three main factors which are common. First, the ambition. Without ambition, you cannot succeed in anything. Secondly, a stable vision of the transition, which was mentioned by Izabela. And third, a simple regulatory environment. In Poland, we don't have this stable vision, because it's closer to science fiction than textbook. So far, these activities are quite chaotic, not very cohesive, not very well-planned transition. Also, the changing regulatory environment is not helpful, because we see the increase of the loan risks. Well, if I was to add something, I would say that among our decision makers, we need to see more understanding and internalizing what's happening in the EU, because Polish policy is shaped with this great skepticism towards the EU. So we are focusing our efforts to avoid everything which we consider as imposed, and we don't see the benefits from this EU climate policy. Alicja, thank you very much. Well, we got to the end to the discussion. I would like to thank very much. I think that in the coming years, in the public debate, we will be more intensely confronting the problems connected with the increasing speed of the transition. And of course, we are going to take a close look. And I would like to thank you, ladies, for participating in this discussion. Thank you very much for spending 60 minutes with us, and I invite you to continue to watch subsequent discussions as part of Risks and Trends.